In today's lecture, we shall discuss Nietzsche's idea of human, his idea of God or religion, and also his idea of morality. Let us begin with his understanding of human or what it means to be human, his conception of human. We have already spoken about the two perspectives, Apollonian and the Dionysian perspective, which Nietzsche has developed in his works. His understanding of human is primarily to be seen from the Dionysian point of view. Something that is dynamic and alive, that spontaneity of the Dionysian character. This dynamic character of the human can be explained in terms of three important interrelated concepts, one relying on the other: will to power, overman, and eternal recurrence. Let me now begin with this understanding of will to power. In order to understand Nietzsche, let us recall to mind what Freud has spoken about the human drives. Freud speaks of two basic drives in human person: eros and thanatos. The eros is the life drive or the drive for life, and thanatos is the death drive, the drive for death. Now, according to Freud, all movements in this world are caused by the struggle between these two powerful instincts: the instinct for life or the drive for life, and the drive for death. For Nietzsche, contrary to Freud, it is not these instincts or the struggle between these instincts that cause movements in the world, but there is just one basic dynamism, that is will to power. This will to power is the basis for all dynamism in the world. Why is this will to power important? This is because Nietzsche conceives of the human person as totally forsaken, standing alone, having only his or her existence as the only value. Now you remember I told you that Nietzsche is also considered as one of the pioneers of existential thinking, though he is not grouped among the existentialists, but his ideas have tremendously influenced the successive existential thinkers. So all that you have as a value is the fact that you exist. Everything else, as regards everything else is concerned, you are just forsaken, you are standing alone. And if this existence is the only value that you have, then you have to make something of this existence. And it is will to power is the dynamism that enables you to make something out of this existence. Therefore, for Nietzsche, anything that contributes towards this will to power is valuable. Now, this will has something to do with the Darwinian struggle of the fittest for survival. But here Nietzsche is not considered about the point of view of survival, but about the existence in a very, very larger sense of the term. Now, survival is just, you have to somehow live, but existence includes all the dynamic aspect of your life, not just about, struggling to live. Survival, therefore, for Nietzsche is only a corollary, a byproduct of the struggle itself, which is directed towards the discharge of power. Now, this is the dynamic aspect of our psychic life. And this is kind of manifested in the will to power. In other words, there is a constant way that we have to become ourselves. Nietzsche is very much comfortable with this evolutionary understanding, not merely from the biological point of view, that becoming oneself implies that we are not a finished product once and for all. There is no one fixed human substance that we are given, but we constantly create it. So this will to power therefore implies this idea of becoming more and more of oneself, which also can be seen as overcoming oneself. So life is a constant striving, and you need to strive more and more. So the more and more you strive to become more and more of yourself, overcoming yourself, you are responsive to the will to power. Now obviously power is an ambiguous term, because this is one of the reasons why he was completely misinterpreted, um, partly due to his sister who was a Nazi, and therefore she interpreted his idea of power in a very conducive way for Nazism. So Hitler seems to have been inspired by this misinterpretation of will to power. He understood power in the literal sense of the term. Nietzsche has not specified the meaning of power, but then we need to try to interpret Nietzsche from within a certain philosophy that he already upholds, in the philosophy of life and dynamism, and of course a few stray references that he makes, that we can try and understand its meaning. So the will to power is related to his idea of or the concept of master. Now the notion of mastery stands for everything that corresponds to the feeling of being constantly on the move towards the more, the better, the greater, the higher. It is a constant striving. Now, if you realize in Nietzsche's philosophy, the opposite of masters are the slaves, the weak, the lowly, the stagnant, who are unenthusiastic, who are just laid back, who have no enthusiasm to move ahead. So will to power therefore has to be understood in a way that it is a will to risk power in order to get more power to spend it. Now again, power here has to be understood as your ability to strive, your ability to be enthusiastic to go greater heights, and then to move forward, to become better. So all these things are implied in this. So power is not therefore the goal itself. It refers to the process of this particular will, this striving. Normally, if you understand power as the goal, then obviously you would end up misinterpreting Nietzsche, because then you are always trying to get more power and more power. No, power is there as a process for more striving, to become more, to have greater ideals. So therefore the human for Nietzsche is a tightrope walker. A tightrope walker is someone who is on the move. He doesn't remain there because he is afraid of moving forward. Obviously it is frightening when you look from above, on a rope, when you are walking on a rope, it is frightening. But then that doesn't deter you from not making progress. You need to move, on the move. So that is the will to power that we need to look at that. Life may throw out challenges, throw challenges at you, but that doesn't deter you from, from being enthusiastic of making the best out of it. So making the best out of your existence. So Nietzsche's understanding of will to power is basic dynamism of being human. So we cannot remain where we are. We have to be constantly moving ahead. Now we can have many interpretations of this kind of thinking in our reflections. We'll take it up during discussion. Now it is against this background, again we need to understand his idea of Overman, often translated as Superman, but the German word itself is Übermensch. Now the Übermensch, or this Overman, is this worldly antithesis to God. You remember now that God is dead, we have killed him. We don't know how to even wash the blood with which we have stained our hand. And therefore we need an antithesis. But again, not an otherworldly antithesis, this worldly antithesis, which should give you reference for all meaning in your life. Now, though the word Overman is used in the singular term, it does not refer to any individual. Though this idea of Overman is powerfully presented by the prophet Zarathustra, Nietzsche does not even refer to Zarathustra as the Overman. So the Overman stands therefore for every one of us in some way. It's not about any particular individual. Because just as God was the meaning of the earth formerly by stagnating human life, now Overman is the meaning of the earth. So the Overman is a mere replacement of God in that sense, but of course this worldly. The idea of Overman is therefore in some way historical for Nietzsche, insofar as it refers to the human in our earthly existence. But it is also in some way above history, it is super history or supra historical, insofar as we never able to realize this fully. So his understanding of Overman is to be understood as an invitation to develop our own life, each one of us, beyond the present limits, and thus to keep on shaping the future. So there is no God who would make sense of your life, who would shape your future. You take your life in your hands. Of course there are limits. Life is not without limits. But then you need to keep shaping the future. Now this is a very common kind of understanding in the 20th, 21st century, but at the time of Nietzsche, I mean, this was completely unheard of. So that is what made him a revolutionary thinker, a man who is before his time, or his ideas were at least before his time. So the human is compared to the rope stretched between the animal and the Overman. So you remember the tightrope walker. So you are on the rope, but then you are between the animal, which is not fully kind of evolved in a certain sense, and the Overman, not realized fully. The human is the bridge or the process and not the goal. See, the Overman therefore is a product of a certain kind of morality which Nietzsche propagates, what we call the master morality. We'll come to that in a moment. All his paths are channelized towards growth. The arrival of the Overman obviously was not met with enthusiasm by most people, since many people prefer to have a mediocre process of the present mode of existence. Only a few individuals like Zarathustra who acknowledge that there is no intrinsic purpose or meaning except the meaning that is given by the Overman. Again, Overman is not some outside agency, it's each one of us. The ability to realize the best of our ability. And then Nietzsche says these are the people who have the courage to have fresh illusions. That is illusion in as much as God is an illusion, or God giving meaning is an illusion, but this is a fresh illusion and it is earthbound and therefore it is creative. It's better to be creative rather than leading a dead life. So now you understand the idea of Overman is deeply human. Deeply human insofar as it is a constant strive to go beyond the limits, and that's part of what we are. I mean, we never like to be contained by the limits that are imposed on us, because we would like to shape our future the way we would like to. I mean, as each individual. But it is possible that many of us are very comfortable and secure in the present mode of existence. We wouldn't move a finger, we wouldn't try to make any advancement in that direction. It is deplorable according to Nietzsche. Then we will end up being slaves, and then we would not be cultivating what he calls a master morality. About the morality itself, we will come back in a moment. This is one of the most elegant ideas of Nietzsche, the idea of eternal recurrence. The word is self-explanatory. Recurring, it keeps happening over and over again. Eternal, it doesn't end. I mean, it has always been there, it will always be there. This idea of eternal recurrence is discussed in his work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Now, this is not something that Nietzsche has invented on his own. Some of these ideas are already present in the ancient thinking, in the Greek thinking, particularly the Stoics. And from our Indian point of view, we do have something about this cycle that keeps repeating. Of course, it may be interpreted in a different way, applied to a different context. Now, to sum it up, this idea, what it means is what is now has always been and it will always be. And it will be happening innumerable times at immense intervals. It keeps recurring over and over again. It is something like, in the olden days we used to have a kind of musical instrument called phonograph. I don't know whether any of you have seen that or heard that, but surely you might have seen that. The images are available. If a particular scratch is that in that disc that is being played, it keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. It is something like that, in case if you want to, it's only to give a visual image for you. But this idea of eternal recurrence is very frightening for all of us, mostly for the ordinary masses. Because the reality has no purpose or culmination. You see, when you have things recurring over and over again, obviously it lacks purpose. An understanding of linear understanding of time implies, we are moving towards a purpose. There is a gradual movement from one to another towards something. Now, if something is cyclical, and it is the same thing over and over again, there is no purpose, and it is very frightening. And there is no purpose, there is no climax, there is no culmination. The Western world was very comfortable in this idea of the climax of history, which is very Hegelian understanding, but it has been all along, not only just Hegelian, but Hegel accentuated it, followed by Marx as well in the materialistic dimension of it, which was very reassuring for people in many ways. But for Nietzsche, he says we need to learn to accept this situation and find joy in it. The reason is there is no way in which you can reconcile yourself with this apparently meaningless recurrence. Therefore, it is important that you embrace it joyfully. Now, Nietzsche himself has not developed this idea in a very detailed manner. He has, referred to this in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and then a little idea also in the Gay Science. In fact, it was in the Gay Science, so the first time he wrote this. I'm not going to give the whole quote. Maybe I shall read that quote. It's a very interesting quote. It is in the aphorism 341. I will read it slowly. Nietzsche is having some kind of thought experiment, in this aphorism. So he is saying these following words. What if some day or night a demon were to steal after you into your loneliest loneliness and said to you, this life as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more. And there will be nothing new in it, but every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything unutterably small or great in your life will have to return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even the spider and this moonlight between the trees, and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned upside down again and again, and you with it speck of dust. The hourglass is you have got the sand that you just count time, you just keep rotating as it falls, how many minutes it takes. That is how you calculate the time. So it is like you are like a dust in that hourglass. Then he continues saying, would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon who spoke thus? Or have you once experienced a tremendous moment when you would have answered him, "You are a God, and never have I heard anything more divine"? You are a God, and never have I heard anything more divine. If this thought gained possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and everything, do you desire this once more and innumerable times more, would lie upon your actions as the greatest weight? Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life? Now, Nietzsche himself, suddenly he says this idea came to him as he was walking along the lake in Switzerland. You see, um, this idea, of course, it is in a seminal form in the Gay Science. Again, he develops in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, particularly in the section of Will to Power, this idea of eternal recurrence. Now, Nietzsche is not saying this idea of eternal recurrence is the absolute truth, because Nietzsche would be critical of anything that is kind of truth with a capital T, you see, the one truth and so on. He doesn't insist on this idea as a truth anywhere in his thing, but then he is presenting this idea of eternal recurrence as a thought experiment, a test to our own attitude towards life. Now, from Nietzsche's background, what he is asking is precisely this: what kind of reaction you would have if this were to be true? If this idea of eternal recurrence were true? Obviously, our first reaction would be hopelessness, because nobody likes to relive the same thing over and over again. It is such a boring thing, It is tragic, obviously, and especially all the suffering that we have to relive, which we have already. So, and then the infinite number of times, it is innumerable. It keeps repeating. Now then, suppose if you have a different kind of reaction, suppose if you kind of embrace this idea, accept it happily, then Nietzsche says this is the ultimate expression of life-affirming attitude. To want this life with all its pain and boredom and frustration again and again. So what we say is basically, Nietzsche is a life affirmer, somebody who embraces the love of one's fate, amor fati, as they say in Latin. So this is possible. This, embracing this eternal recurrence is to be seen for Nietzsche as the ultimate expression of one's love for life, and to remain faithful to the earth. But only this is possible if you are an Overman, if you are a Übermensch, a higher kind of being, not somebody who is kind of weak, inferior kind of. Again, Nietzsche doesn't make categories of people. There are some who are, superior, inferior, but then it's depending on what kind of life you are, what kind of attitude you take to your life, you define what kind of, whether you want to strive towards Overman, or you just want to be the ultimate man, like the camel shouldering all the burden, which we have discussed last class. So eternal recurrence thus offers a notion of immortality, but in a very different sense, counter to the one proposed by Western Christianity. Of course, now there is no God, so therefore you learn to embrace this in joyful wisdom, and that's what he would say. So in a certain sense, therefore, the doctrine of eternal recurrence is a victory over nihilism. It's a new concept of immortality, but it's a tragic one. But then it retreats the meaning of human life as a never-ending strive. It goes on and on, recurs over and over again. Some people say Nietzsche was too much preoccupied with this idea of eternal recurrence, but if you think too much about it, it is really kind of frightful, Nowadays, many scientists would say time is also, it gets in a loop. It kind of repeats itself in some way. And there are a lot of, suppose if scientists come with this all this time travel and so on, uh, this is going to be very frightening reality. I mean, we don't know many things about this reality yet, but if we kind of do know, it will be. There is one nice, if you guys watch series, I'm sure most of you do on Netflix. There is one nice series, nice, I mean, little kind of complicated series. Somebody suggested to me, so I began watching, called Dark. It's a German series. This idea comes there in a very subtle way. I mean, Nietzsche is very powerfully, Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence is powerfully there. It is about this past and present colliding, in some way. Um, anyway, you later you can have a look at it and then you think about it. That's only for your reference. I am saying that. Now that we have discussed about Nietzsche's idea of human in terms of will to power, his idea of Overman or Übermensch, and the idea of eternal recurrence, let us focus on his idea of God and religion. Nietzsche considers himself an atheist by very instinct or by nature. He never even doubted that he is an atheist. Nietzsche is not a kind of atheist who would, give arguments to refute the existence of God. That is not the kind of atheism he is interested in. But his whole philosophy can be seen as an argument for the death of God. But it is very different from the conventional ways of disproving existence of God, through some logic and things like that, which people have been trying, or proving God's existence. Either way, it is ridiculous. You can neither prove nor disprove from the traditional point of view if you are approaching it. But Nietzsche is not the same kind of atheist compared to the other atheists in philosophy you would come across. His philosophy itself is an argument for God's death. In the first place, to believe in somebody so unlike life, because the moment you think of God, it's a kind of very different, at least the Western point of view. It is not something that helps you immerse in life, and this kind of belief in a being is irrational for Nietzsche. Therefore, to believe in such a God is a crime against life. Nietzsche is exaggerating, definitely. All that he is exaggerating is precisely because, as I told you, his experience with his family faith was so kind of disheartening. Not only disheartening, it is very disruptive. It was not anyway helpful for anyone's growth. He was raised in a Puritan family. Everything is sin, everything is wrong. You cannot really enjoy anything in life. Even if you like to enjoy a nice chocolate, that is sinning against God, really. I mean, when you are kind of growing in a situation like that, obviously, you don't like to believe in a being who denies life, somebody who strangles your life. So God, for him, stands for all that is is a symbol of strangling life. So from that point of view, to believe in such a God is a crime against life itself. Nietzsche did not find the need for philosophy to seek beyond to a transcendent principle. Now, all philosophy, somehow they wanted a transcendent principle on which they want to found their philosophical position. And if you happen to be a religious person or a theistic person, then obviously you would look God as the transcendent principle, a principle which lies beyond, but based on which your every idea can be built. So, for Nietzsche, it was not therefore a simple atheism of not just believing in God, but a catastrophic historic philosophical experience, namely, God is dead. What for centuries people held in belief is no more. Now, God is dead does not simply mean literally, a person dead. No, all that we have been cherishing in terms of morality, once God is dead, now is there anything that you can really hold on to? Because God was something that was enabling people to hold on to many things as right, wrong, true, untrue. Now everything is gone. So death of God may bring at first relief and encouragement, but then again it causes a crisis. The faith crisis for Nietzsche, which he predicted, is going to be the serious crisis. Not because you are losing faith, but because in the absence of God, we will be struggling to hold on to anything at all. And our culture is not used to it. So, the problem of Nietzsche's philosophy is to help humankind to live through this crisis by building a new basis which will somehow justify the loss of the old by the creation of a higher form of existence. So, now, a certain absolutism is dead because God stands for a certain absolutism in philosophy, morality, and so on. That is dead. But then we need still something to go by. We cannot simply be nihilistic. It is simply not possible. But then, therefore, Nietzsche is thinking of his own philosophy as helping humankind, go through this crisis by building a new basis. Nietzsche makes critique of Christianity in his famous work called Antichrist. As I told you last lecture already, he has his own secret respects for Christ because he really thought Christ, if he is taken as in its pure way, without any of this faith formula attached to him, probably, Christ affirmed life as different from the religious people of his time who strangled life. So Christ, according to Nietzsche, at least when he looks at the life of Christ as has been handed down to him, he finds the figure of Christ, the historical figure of Christ, as someone who affirmed life, who embraced life, as different from the Pharisaic religion of his time that apparently strangled life. Again, it is an interpretation. Now, that is Nietzsche's interpretation. I don't think anybody can say one religion strangle life. If you ask me, I would say that is again a Christian interpretation of Jewish religion. I don't think it's fair enough to do that. But the point of the matter is not that. The point of the matter is the life which was affirmed by Christ has now been strangled by a certain Christian faith. So, there is a certain resentment and hatred that has been in the so-called religion of love. The resentment is hatred towards life itself. The notion of God, meaning to say the idea of God as the symbol of stagnation, was invented by Christianity, according to Nietzsche, by forging the signature of God as an antithesis to the instincts of life in order to suppress life, its joys and richness. One thing seems to be very clear. Nietzsche has nothing against God himself, but against the way God is proclaimed by religions, at least the religion he knew. What he says can be applied to every other religion in some way. So he has nothing against God, the idea of God in that sense, if it is simply God. But then the way, the meaning that is confirmed on God as an antithesis to life, which any religion is capable of doing, and he thought his own religion did it, that is very problematic. So the Christian understanding of love, sympathy, selflessness, spirit of sacrifice, all these things for him are expressions of strangling of this life. Well, again, it is a kind of exaggerated position, but nevertheless important to pay attention. Why is that you want to go on speak about selflessness? Why you want to speak about sacrifice? Why you want to speak about sympathy? Why you want to speak about finally it's all about denying your own life for the sake of something else. So some interpret Nietzsche's criticism as a secret yearning for the true and genuine Christianity. It is only a probability. As the main tenet of Christianity, the existence of God is denied by Nietzsche. It has nothing to base itself on. Hence, it will have its natural death. This is the crisis that he warned people of 19th century. You will definitely have this crisis. Nietzsche claims to be responsible for this by his proclaiming the death of God. The death of God has a very multiple layer of meaning. At least one thing is very clear. Um, Nietzsche is not merely happily announcing the death of God. Okay, he is also lamenting it. We have killed him, but what have we done with it? Meaning to say, it is not enough that God is dead. That is simply nihilistic. Unless otherwise you have an antithesis, this worldly antithesis. That is important. So the death of God is proclaimed, yes, but it can only be kind of seen with something positive unless and otherwise you create this, you for strive more for life. Otherwise, in itself, it doesn't serve the purpose. I mean, therefore you can find that kind of layer of meaning in his writings. Particularly, I think again it is in Gay Science. He has this powerful statement. So again, death of God is not to be taken literally. Okay, so you understand the meaning behind it. All that all that absolutism that we would like to hold on to, we want to cherish. It's a death blow to the absolutism that we would like to have as humans, which makes us very comfortable oftentimes, but which is life denying, obviously, for Nietzsche at least. Now that we have spent some time on Nietzsche's understanding of God and religion, let us now focus on his morality. Nietzsche divides the moral history of human life in three periods that he does in his famous work, another famous work titled Genealogy of Morals. In fact, Foucault has taken this inspiration from this when he developed his idea of genealogy in his work. That he gives a meaning, Nietzschean meaning to that. Anyway, the three periods are pre-moral, moral, and extra-moral. Now, what is pre-moral? Pre-moral is a prehistoric stage. In a prehistoric stage, normally, your action gets value dependent on its consequence. In other words, if your consequence is good, then your action is something that is valuable. So, your action can be rewarded or punishment, and the reward and punishment also can influence your action. So, this is a kind of pre-moral stage. Moral is what we have been witnessing for several thousand years now. Action is judged by its origin, meaning to say by the conscious intention. So we look for the intention and accordingly you judge the action. Now, extra moral is what he is proclaiming. It has not begun, but he wants it to commence. This extra moral can only be practiced by the pioneers of Overman, who are already, striving for more and more, for overcoming oneself. It consists for him in cultivation of hard virtues, but very importantly, these hard virtues lie beyond the normal binaries that we make good and evil. Hard virtues do not go by this binary of good and evil. Now, therefore, an action according to Nietzsche gets value depending on whether or not it contributes to the increase of will to power or life. Anything that contributes to your will to power keeps that dynamism moving, keeps that life affirming possibility in you alive, that would be a value. So therefore, you cannot here merely limit something as something good or bad by the consequence or by the intention, but you simply look at what is value. Anything else is not a value. That's it. So one's being moral does not depend on following certain moral laws. Okay, there are several types of morality people may talk about. But the most important thing, as far as he is concerned about, is the master and slave morality. Now, again, be careful about this. Master and slave morality doesn't mean there are two groups of people, like in the Hegelian master-slave dialectics. No, he doesn't mean that. So basically, the master morality is a kind of self-affirmation. The dynamic character of master morality is expressed in two tensions. The first is the passion of distance or feeling of superiority, by which again feeling of superiority doesn't mean I'm superior to someone, but I am worthwhile. It is that kind of affirmation. I am not someone whom you think like some kind of insect. No, by which the masters can contrast themselves with the slaves. The second type of tension arises, in the sense of striving away from one another. So the tension is striving away from one another would mean, um, you are trying to rise above the weak and lowly in humans, glorifying the weak and lowly in humans, glorify whatever destroys life. So, for example, the slave morality would mean too much insistence on humility, obedience, patience, but that is not helpful at all. So, Nietzsche also critically looks at the existing values and calls for a revaluation of all values, or also known as a transvaluation of values. In a godless age, there must be a critique of all accepted pattern of conduct and radical revaluation of values. So the nihilist has to wipe the slate clean and then compose afresh, his own tablets of law. If God is dead, the conscience cannot claim to be the oracle of living truth, because oftentimes, conscience is evoked as kind of a residue of your morality. There are no moral phenomena, but only moral interpretations of the phenomena. Nietzsche finds everything bad in the old morality that condemns the will to power, which is essential to life. So we are faced with the dilemma: either one has to do away with one's venerations or with oneself. Nietzsche took upon himself and the task of dethroning most of the virtues and enthroning only those traits that encouraged life. Nietzsche's attempt to give meaning for human existence has been quite influential. He stressed the meaninglessness of certain dualism, either or structure in life that is centered on the absolute truth, or binary, good or evil, for example. Nietzsche's concern was to base human existence on the solid foundation, although he has not succeeded in it fully. Well, he has been a victim of much misunderstanding with regard to philosophical positions, but definitely is one of the great stalwarts of philosophy who continues to influence even today with all the new movements in philosophy, with like postmodernity, post-structuralism. All of them are greatly indebted to Nietzsche for their ideas, at least in the seminal form. So with this, I conclude this lecture. We will open up for discussion. Thank you.